Mike Hoffmann is the executive director of the Cornell Institute for Climate Smart Solutions, which was created to help raise the profile of the challenges posed by a rapidly warming climate and to help those who grow our food adapt to the changing conditions as well as reduce their carbon footprint. As executive director, he provides visionary leadership, communicates to a wide range of audiences the challenges and the opportunities that come with a changing climate. He also builds partnerships among the public and the private organizations. At Cornell, he also serves as co-chair of the President's Sustainable Campus Committee and helps lead a climate change literacy initiative for the entire campus. Previous positions he has held include director of the Cornell University Agricultural Experiment Station, Associate Dean of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, Associate Director of Cornell Cooperative Extension, and Director of the New York State Integrated Pest Management Program. He is a professor in the Department of Entomology, where he focused on integrated pest management of insect pests of vegetables. He received his bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin, master's from the University of Arizona, and PhD from the University of California, Davis. Mike was raised on a small farm in Wisconsin and subsequently worked in agriculture in Arizona, California, and New York State. He is a veteran serving with the Marines of the Vietnam War, has 2 daughters, one living in Boston and the other in Utah. He enjoys travel, hiking, and good humor. Mike?
Good afternoon. Wow, what a conference, huh? All those smiling faces out there. I think I just made several hundred friends with Hannah's welcoming comments. So I'm really honored to be here today to talk about a topic that's really pressing and really important. Last year was a tough year. How many sense something strange is going on out there with the climate? A lot of times I ask that question and say to myself, why am I here? Everybody understands what's happening. So I'd like you to hold on to your hats. We're going to take a roller coaster ride. I'm talking about climate change, that's going down, the roller coaster. It can be a little overwhelming, to be honest, depressing at times when you really listen to the news that's coming in every day. But then, so basics of climate change, the evidence all around us, then we're going out to dinner. Everybody bring their Visa card, MasterCard, plenty of cash? Yes? Okay. We're going to talk about what's changing on the menu. Everything. Not doom and gloom, but change is there. And then we're going to talk about solutions and need to act. But first, I'd like you to imagine you're in a doctor's office. You haven't been feeling well. They've done a number of tests, a little anxiety about all of this. So you're going to meet with the doctor for the final diagnosis. Sit down in her office. She comes right up front, looks you in the eye, sitting face to face, and says, I'm going to be blunt. I'm going to tell you the truth. You've got a very serious condition. All the tests, standard tests, indicate the same thing. You can get a second, third opinion, same test. The evidence is there. And we need to treat you right away, starting tomorrow. Are you with me? Yes, you would be. So that's not that different from climate change. The data are solid. The diagnosis is in. Now we need to act. You with me? I'm going to check in now and then. So the title, Climate Change in Our Global Food System, A Call to Action. We're going to start with my favorite topic, me. So it was mentioned I grew up on a small farm, small dairy farm in Wisconsin. This is when you asked Mike, just how small was it, Mike? We had one cow. But that cow produced the milk for the household. My mom made butter, occasionally made cottage cheese, had a separator. I don't think anybody knows what that is, an old hand crank separator. I was too small. My older brother hated that thing. It separates the cream from the milk. Good way to start. But there's the photograph of me milking a cow in Costa Rica on vacation at this little wonderful farm. And I remembered how to milk a cow. It's like riding a bike. You never forget. I had that cow milked out in about 3 minutes. The tour guide and the farmer were like, wow, we don't see this very often. And up behind there's an anaerobic digester, and we toured that. I got all excited about that. That was pretty unusual. I got excited about the manure, and I could milk a cow. So that little farm also had a crow named Carl. Years later, I realized, it could have been Carla. But when you're 9 years old, you don't talk to your pet crow about those kind of things. Went to high school, went to 1 year of college and quit. As was mentioned, I joined the Marines so I could serve in Vietnam. That does help with some audiences. Helps a lot. Then I held these leadership positions, and anybody in a leadership position, like a CEO, associate dean, better be looking at the big picture, and climate change is a big picture. And one other really important part of this climate change story is it's personal. Those are my daughters. What about the next generation? And lastly, I like the slogan in airports, if you see something, say something, and I'm here today to say something. So, back to meeting with that doctor. Better a cruel truth than a comfortable delusion. What's this? How about home? Any other options? Carl Sagan says it best, our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity and all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. That orange band on the surface of the Earth is called the troposphere. Right here, it's 5 or 6 miles high. That's it. That's where the action occurs. Storms, clouds, snow. So imagine solar energy coming down, hits the surface of the Earth, and it's a snow-covered field. Most of that energy is reflected right back up, but if it hits a dark surface, it's absorbed and warms up. That radiant energy goes back up into the troposphere and encounters greenhouse gases, which pick it up and absorb it. They're kind of like insulation. They hold on to it. Some is radiated back. And we've had just the right level of greenhouse gases in that thin blanket for a long time. But now we're making that blanket denser. We're adding more and more greenhouse gases in that little layer. The blanket's getting denser. Just like during the wintertime, you put on a heavier blanket. That's what's happening. That's why the atmosphere is warming up. Carbon dioxide is a major greenhouse gas. It's the most persistent and the most abundant. And if the chart here shows from the year 1000 to current year 1000 to current times, pretty much tooling along at about 280 parts per million until we get to the Industrial Revolution and started to burn far more fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. And essentially, it's gone up exponentially since then. And if we continue, we're going to hit 900 parts per million by the end of the century. That's pretty warm. Right now, it's 411. Every time I give a talk, I have to double check to see where we are at today's CO2 level. Right now, it's 411. That's 40% higher than it should be. The experts agree. It's happening. We are the cause. And it's not natural. Everybody hopes it's a cycle. It's not. The sun, every 11 years, pushes out a little more energy, but it's just a tiny amount. That doesn't account for the warming. The Earth circles the sun in an ellipse, so sometimes we're closer to it, further away, but right now we're not again closer. There's other things that happen on many thousands of year cycles. None of those explain it. It's happening too fast and too intense to be natural. Another way to look at it, think of a bathtub. The bathtub is the atmosphere, and it's filling up with greenhouse gases. In the past, the drain was where all of the greenhouse gases were absorbed by the oceans, the plants, etc. And the faucet was just right, so that they were equal, and the balance was right. But now we've turned that faucet up, and the drain can't keep up. The atmosphere is filling up with greenhouse gases. And so let's summarize this a little bit. We gained about 2 degrees Fahrenheit globally. It's warming much faster at the poles, 3 to 4 times faster. I had to change this next line today, because yesterday it said the last 4 years. The news today, it's the last 5 years. It's the hottest ever recorded. Greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide, last thousands of years, so it'll take a long time to turn this around. And some definitions. Global warming. Focus on the word warming. The atmosphere is warming because we're putting more greenhouse gases in it. That's it. It's warming up. Global warming. Climate is what you expect. San Diego right now, balmy, sunny. Chicago, cold and blustery. That's what you expect. But that's changing. This was an extremely wet year here, or it's an extremely very warm winter. The climate, or what you expect, is changing. Climate change. Weather is what's happening outside right now. Short term, days, weeks, months. Just because we have a very cold winter doesn't mean climate change isn't happening. Climate change is over decades. Weather is short term. The evidence, it's all around us. And the best one is ice. Nature's best thermometer, perhaps its most sensitive and unambiguous indicator of climate change, is ice. It asks no questions, presents no arguments, reads no newspapers, listens to no debates. It is not burdened by ideology and carries no political baggage. As it changes from a solid to a liquid, it just melts. And we're in the great melt. Glaciers are melting worldwide, with a few exceptions. Glacier meltwater is critically important to hydroelectric power in a lot of places, but also irrigation. We import about $4 billion worth of fresh produce from Chile and Peru every year. It's pretty much dependent on meltwater. And those glaciers will disappear in coming decades. The image above with the yellow line, that's summer sea ice in the Arctic. Now the yellow line is where that all should be filled in with white sea ice, but it's not. The difference between the yellow line and that image, which was taken in September, is 700,000 square miles of nice open blue ocean that's now absorbing heat, warming up, resulting in more melting ice. You get the picture. The image of the forest I took while hiking in Colorado a few years ago as an entomologist. At first I had paused. What's going on here? Well, bark beetles have exploded in the western mountains. Drier conditions, stressing the trees, less snowfall, higher temperatures, the insects reproduce faster. They're devastating millions of acres of our forest in the west. Some of that lends to the fires. And oh no, I'm just so excited about this. Oceans, warm water takes up more space. Thermal expansion, it contributes to sea level rise. Plus all the meltwater from the glaciers and other ice caps is adding. So far about 8 inches to the sea level. Doesn't sound like much, but it's going to continue. And the other thing is the oceans are becoming more acidic. They're about 30% more acidic than in the past. And this challenges organisms that build shells. So let's shift to the food system. No longer business as usual, more variability, more risk, local to global impacts. So a few years ago, I had the chance to actually meet the president of Kraft Foods at that time and ask her about climate change. And she paused and said, price volatility is costing us about $3 billion a year. We're a big company, but that's a lot of money. Essentially, you source from one place, and all of a sudden something happened there. You lost your source. You had to go somewhere else and pay a much higher price. The top image shows a shift north in planting zones, simply because winters are warmer. We've actually moved one entire zone north. The Canadians love this. They're expanding their grain production north of the border. We can grow canola now in northern New York. We could not grow there in 1990 because of warmer winters. The lower left, we have a longer growing season or frost-free season. So the last spring, frost in the spring and the first in the fall, essentially that span between is longer. So in the Northeast, we've gained about 10 days, out west close to 20 days. The one that's probably most important right here is the lower right. That's essentially an increase in downpours or heavy precipitation events. We're up 71% here in these heavy precipitation events, and in between, more intermittent droughts. I'll be back. A quote from a local farmer upstate New York: "As a farmer, you can weather the storm, but you can't weather continuous storms. It's getting tougher." Crop losses documented in the Northeast between the years 2013 and 16. You can see that excess moisture taking about a 30% toll, drought 38%, heat 10%, and frost about 14%. Now let's look to the future. In the upper image, you'll notice a bit of a gray band across the bottom. The blue line is the average annual temperature every year. You just average the entire temperature for that part of for central New York for the year, and it's plotted. And you notice all the points on the blue line are encompassed by that gray band. Now start looking forward, say 2050 or so. You'll notice that the coldest average year at 2050 will be hotter than any previous 200 years. We're essentially moving into a whole new realm, much warmer. And down below is precipitation, looking towards the end of the century. Wet areas in general will get wetter. Actually, here we've gained about 5 inches since the early 1900s. Dry areas drier. And if you'll find the Northeast on that world map, you notice it's blue. So we're going to continue to have adequate moisture. The rest of the U.S., much of the rest of the U.S., is going to get drier. Is that an opportunity? It might be. Hear this all the time. Well, wait a minute. Increasing carbon dioxide, isn't that good for plants? Sure. But the consensus is it's pretty much going to get offset by more extreme weather. There's been some really interesting research on growing weeds under controlled conditions, increasing levels of CO2, and it turns out they become harder to control with glyphosate, Roundup. In fact, Roundup fails at a certain level. Insects eat more. They think because the plants are less nutritious, they have to eat more. Less protein in pollen for bees. But the last one is the one that gets my attention. There's actually been a 9% decrease in protein content in some of our major staple crops, like rice, wheat, barley, and potatoes. They thought initially, that's because the breeders are focused on yield and disease. But no, it's actually because there's more CO2, carbon dioxide, in the atmosphere. It's also affected micronutrients like zinc and iron. So if you're currently somewhere in the world on a protein-short diet, this is not good news. We're still going down, but we're going to turn around. Don't worry. Technology. See, there's just this little button I have to hit just once. You ought to see me with an iPhone. Chokepoints. This was a really interesting paper out of the Chatham House in the UK. There's these constricted points around the world through which enormous quantities of food and fertilizer move, but they're being constrained. The Panama Canal. The waters at the top of the canal are receding, are getting lower because of a long-term drought. So the large ships can't use the Panama Canal. Yet 50 million tons of grain move through the Panama Canal every year. And there's a lot of other choke points around the world that make it disrupted by political upheaval when people get hungry. So it's an interesting look to the future and these things that kind of surprise us. Oh, I never thought of that. And lastly, the 4th National Climate Assessment just came out on agriculture last year, and it's pretty much the same story, looking to the future: rising temperatures, extreme heat, drought, wildfires, heavy downpours, etc. will continue to disrupt agriculture in the U.S. Here we go. We're going to start going back up the roller coaster. And I mean, you know it's got to be true when someone tries to make a dime on the thing. So here's a beer named Global Warmer. It's out of Brooklyn. It is seasonal, and I cannot figure out why it is seasonal. Comes in a 4-pack. It's very good. I have a couple cans in my office. They're empty. But on the back, extended refrigeration at retail magnifies beer's carbon footprint. Please enjoy as soon as possible. So you ready? You just had lunch, I know, but let's walk through a meal, a dinner. Growing foods no longer business as usual. Supply chains are changing. So let's look at a nice meal, starting with before dinner drinks. Olives and all fruit and nut crops require a winter chill. Olives in California and the Mediterranean are at risk of having winters simply being too warm to set fruit. 2 years ago, the pistachio crop in California got hit. Hundreds of millions of dollars of losses because the winter was too warm. The trees didn't produce. If you see the limes, what if they're coming from Chile or Peru? That's going to change. Tequila is made with agave. The long-term drought we're all aware of in the West also affects Mexico. And agave's a 10-year crop, so you got 4 or 5 bad years in there. It really affected quality and yield. And on the lighter side, there's something called the angel's share. When you store bourbon, et cetera, in barrels out of doors, they lose about 2 to 4% by volume every year. It just goes out through the oak. But it's getting warmer, and they're losing more. Apparently the angel is getting a little greedy. Salad, avocados are in trouble in California and Mexico, about 40% reduction in the next couple of decades. I mentioned grains already in the protein content. Wine grapes are extremely susceptible to changes in temperature, huge changes in Europe, here in California, but maybe we have an opportunity right here. Move Napa right here to Lancaster. Oh, and I see the onion there. It's not related to salads, but onions grown in the Pacific Northwest for onion rings now are producing multiple hearts, which is a real problem if you're trying to get big onion rings. And the reason is it's too warm. They're switching their metabolism makeup, and they're making multiple hearts, and it's a real problem because, needless to say, those onions are worth a lot less. Lobster moved 50 miles north off the coast of Maine because of warming temperatures, ocean temperatures. Shrimp are gone. Rice, if grown in the Mekong Delta of Vietnam, being subjected to saltwater intrusion, up to 40 miles upstream in some rivers. Rice is not salt tolerant. If there was saffron in there, saffron grown in Kashmir in India is in big trouble, mainly because of the same story, too hot, rains at the wrong time. They're now growing saffron, I believe, in Vermont under glass because it is more valuable than gold. Now, I can see people running out right now, starting saffron production. And dessert. Cacao grown in Western Africa, moving to Central America because of conditions there. Vanilla prices quadrupled last year before because of storms in Madagascar. And the big one is coffee. Yes, coffee. I wrote an op-ed a while back on the end of coffee, and the comments I got were really visceral, like, no, you're not getting that cup out of my hand. So it's the point in all of this, if you look carefully, something is changing throughout the menu. And even right here, I had an advanced view of the breakfast, lunch, and dinner menu, and I'm picking a couple of things. Iced tea or tea. The flavors of tea will be changing. Sesame. Growers in certain parts of Africa are actually expanding because sesame does better in hotter conditions. Butter. Hot cows give less milk. Tabasco sauce is a really neat story. There's a family on Avery Island in the Gulf of Mexico producing Tabasco sauce for the last 100-some years. One of the hurricanes came through and wiped out all their pepper crops. They now source from dozens of locations around the world, spreading the risk. Apple Betty. Most apples in the world are grown in China. They got hit with a false spring a while back, wiped out 25% of production. I think I already mentioned peaches. There weren't any peaches out of Georgia a couple of years because of warmer conditions during the winter. And we're writing a book. Our Changing Menu, What Climate Change Means to the Foods We Love and Need. Essentially, it's going to tell this story. It's a celebration of food. It's a celebration of agriculture. And by the way, there's this climate change thing, and here's solutions. Would anybody buy that if it were available? I'm trying to get a pre-order. Here we go. All right. Most of us are fortunate. We can have a meal like that. But what if you live where agriculture is rain-fed or you simply don't have the resources to adapt? We have a food security challenge globally, a national security challenge, and a moral challenge. How many? Overwhelmed? Depressed? We options? Let's move. Ignore, deny, we're too busy. Everybody's busy. But it's really difficult for a lot of us to understand things that are 2100, that's so far away. Up in the Arctic, that doesn't bother me. We're more interested in those immediate challenges right in front of us. And generally, life is good for most of us. Don't bother me with this climate change thing. Now we're going to look at some solutions and opportunities. The food industry is the largest in the world, and the big companies are understanding. They're making changes. They're encouraging what's called climate-smart farming. I'll spend a little time on that. They're looking at their supply chains. Is it the source, transportation, packaging? Where are the risks? How can we address that? New technology in your facilities to reduce your greenhouse gas emission. Investing in the suppliers, in that coffee grower in Nicaragua. And they're also looking for alternative ingredients. Ben & Jerry's doing this a lot. They're looking for alternatives. We have the land-grant system and the Global Alliance for Climate-Smart Agriculture, helping all of us with adaptation and mitigation, new crops, soil health, water and pest management, heat stress, and building partnerships. This is all critical to get us where we need to be, to maintain and be resilient. New initiatives, the USDA created climate change hubs a few years ago to help coordinate and build partnerships in the Northeast, for example. There's 7 of them. This one's headquartered in New Hampshire, and there's the Cornell Institute for Climate-Smart Solutions, where I come from. Basically, we're trying to help farmers stay in business. We focus on climate-smart farming, but also climate-smart communities. They're facing a lot of challenges, too. We have an extension team, the first in the country, that actually dedicates part of their time to climate change, and we help work on decision tools. And I'll cover each of these. So climate-smart farming. Somebody said the other day, and they said, well, that's just common sense farming. I think it is. Soil health, top of the list. I think everyone realizes reduced tillage is important, maintaining organic matter, effective water management. If you're going to irrigate, do it efficiently. Install tiles where needed. And ecologically based pest management. Maybe the message here is just a heads up. We have new pests coming in right and left. Just watch and stay in tune with what's the latest pest that's going to be bothering us. Diversify, mentioned that already. Crops and animals, reduce stress to cattle, the heat. And farm planning and adaptive management, the long term. What do you need to do to stay in business? This is the team. Been in place, I'm going to say 5-6 years. We pay a small amount of their salary, and they incorporate climate change when they're talking to farmers. They're also listening right on the ground, what's happening in the field, and they help deliver the new knowledge that's generated in the system back out to the farm. And these are regional educators. It means they cover multiple counties. So now these climate-smart farming tools. So it rains when you don't want it to rain. We have droughts. We have unusual frost. We're trying to address all of those with new predictive tools. And I'm just going to cover a couple. So this is the water deficit calculator. It basically helps determine when you need to irrigate. So this is available to anybody in this room. It's site-specific. You put in your location, the type of soil, and the type of crop. And essentially gives you a 30-day forecast for how much stress that crop is going to experience and whether or not you need to irrigate or hope it rains. This is a cover crop scheduler. Everybody wants cover crops and needs cover crops, but in the fall, sometimes you have a late harvest. You're not sure if you have enough time. If you plant a cover crop, will it actually stand? Will it develop? And this shows kind of the window. In the middle of that, the straight line across the top, basically saying, so on this chart, it's from September 18th to the end of the month. If you plant during that window, you're going to get 100% stand. If you wait, it's going to drop off. So you can make the call. I think it's worth the investment. I'll still go for 50% stand. And the last one that just was released recently. It's climate change in your county. So the map, you can click on any county in the Northeast and get a view what's happened there since 1950. Precipitation, heat waves, growing degree days, and this one happens to be season length. And you can see the season length has gotten longer in Warren County, New York. Then you can also click sort of forecast. What's the future look like? And that's what's shown down below. And you can see that season length is actually going to increase from the 50s. We're going to gain about 10, 15 days, additional days. But that gives you an idea. What's the season going to look like out in the future? When can I switch crops? So we're trying to get these tools out. They're available to anyone. There's actually some fact sheets down below us on the other floor if you want a list of all of them and access to them. So here we are, going to wrap it up in the Northeast. Challenges and opportunities. More extreme weather, floods, droughts, high temperature, stress, more pests. But we have adequate water, and will have adequate water, longer and warmer growing seasons. Unfortunately, for others, less productivity elsewhere. Does this mean we have the potential to expand and diversify? We also have 22% of the U.S. population here. Who's going to feed them? I think it's an opportunity. So a call to action. The diagnosis is in. Back to that visit to the doctor. It's a new climate reality across the entire food system. We need to strive to adapt, to mitigate our impact, stay informed, and strive to build a resilient food system right here. I always like to say it's all hands on deck. We all have a role. And I was in a conversation recently about straws, the things that come in a soda, and it went on for 20 minutes. I'm sorry, I said, I don't really care about straws. They're not going to make a big difference in the long haul. So Bill McKibben says it right. Push for changes big enough to matter. And this is a book by Paul Hawken, edited by Paul Hawken, called Drawdown. It's how we can get back to where we need to be. Everything from refrigerant, this is the global scope. Management of refrigerant, believe it or not, leakage is a huge problem. Food waste, we have a keynote coming up on that. Switch to a plant-rich diet. Educate women, solar farms, etc. And that's a list that takes you right down. If anybody wants, this is an extremely good resource to have for the big picture, how to address this challenge. I think we need to create a roadmap. We've got the experts that can help predict what the conditions are going to be. So how does that align with a farmer's needs? When will they need to buy irrigation equipment? When will the season be long enough to switch varieties and start a new crop? But people often ask me, what can I do, Mike? I'm just one person. And I will almost always say, raise your voice. Be messengers. Start talking about it. Help others understand what's at stake. And connect food and climate. I just really feel that that's an opportunity for all of us to make that connection. Mention coffee. It'll get their attention. And I was in a restaurant, Elderberry Pond, near Auburn, New York, last summer. I'd opened up the menu, and Lou Lego, the owner, had his story about climate change right there, the first page of the menu, and all they're doing on that farm. I almost broke down. What a place to convey this message, that what it means to farming and everybody's food. And of course, I mentioned coffee, but melting glaciers are bad enough, but the loss of coffee is outright terrifying. That gets people's attention. And lastly, another reason for a call to action, it is personal. The next generation is out there. You notice the Cornell 10, Cornell 06? So, we face this grand challenge. but we can tackle it. Look at the things we've done. Art, cure diseases. Space travel, billions of miles. Technology, agriculture, engineering. We have the capacity to tackle this grand challenge if we have the will.